Hello, my name is Kris. Today we're going to be chatting about the Neumann MT 48. I had a few requests this week about setting it up for the first time, and I figured I'd make a quick video on it. I suppose online a lot of people were running into podcasters and vloggers and voiceover artists that were setting this up for the first time, and the settings didn't quite match, or at least they didn't know if the settings matched the kind of direction they wanted to take as singers. So I helped them out, I set them up, and now I'm going to help you. So on the MT48, I've got my TLM 103 set up here next to me, but the first thing you want to do is plug it in via XLR. I'll move this a little bit. So I've got my XLR cable in right here. It's going straight from the TLM 103 into input 1, and I'm going to zero this out. So you're going to want to select mic 1, and I'll go ahead and zoom in here, get a better view here. And after selecting mic 1, you're going to hit preamp, and then when you're looking at your preamp here, you've got mic or line options. So in this case, we're going to pick mic. It's already set to mic, but I just wanted to show you, just in case you didn't see it there. Let's see if I can darken this up a little bit. No, it won't let me. Maybe I could do this. There you go. So there's mic or line. You're going to want to pick mic for an XLR microphone. All right. Then after that, what you're going to want to do, if you have a condenser microphone like myself, I'm going to go ahead and turn the phantom power on. That's plus 48 volts there. That's going to power up, and then we can use the preamp knob here, and we can adjust. I find that a good talking level for me is around 40. Hopefully I'm not wrong with this. So now if I talk into my mic, it actually appears that I am coming way too hot. Wow. There we go. Okay. So maybe 40 needs to be backed off just a bit. And I'm going to come down to about 37, and it looks like I'm hitting between -12 and -6, which is good. That's about where you want to be. So now that we've got that taken care of, the last thing I'll mention is that you'll likely want to use the low cut, especially if you're a vocalist. There's really no need to have low end in your voice, especially at these low frequencies. 40 hertz, 60 hertz, and 80 hertz just don't really belong down there in modern pop music or modern music in general. If you're one of those guys and you want to have a full transparent image of your recording to work with in post, leave this alone, just leave it off. But if you're like me, you want to save some time, I actually shoot this right up to 80 hertz. If you're hearing low rumbles from cars driving past your window, or maybe you're hearing low rumble from your air conditioning, the vents, or maybe you're hearing it from a refrigerator, there are all sorts of things that are going to create low frequency hum, and in a recording studio they may not have to deal with that as much, but we as home studio owners, we do have the flexibility to take care of this if we need to. So I'm going to leave that at 80 hertz, and then I'm going to hit home now that I'm all set up. Now I'm going to go to mic, and we'll go over the EQ and the dynamics real quick. Mute is pretty self-explanatory. If you mute it, you're not going to hear it in your headphones. So starting with EQ, EQ is very subjective. A lot of people will cut on the way in instead of boosting on the way in. It's better to have more information than not. I believe that is why, or that is the theory behind it. So if I were to go over here and take you to our snapshots first, you'll see that there's already a snapshot in here. It's EQ reset. And EQ reset, if you hit recall, will bring you back to 0. Now, if you wanted to save a preset later on, you could hit snap, choose a number, and then hit store. So if you remember, we made a low cut around 80 hertz. I could actually show you a visual of what that looks like, but we do not need to do this twice. So that's about what we've done by turning on that low cut filter earlier on in the preamp section. Again, we don't have to do this here because we've already done it. Starting with the knobs left to right, you've got type, frequency, gain, and Q. So type is going to determine the type of EQ you're creating. So you've got low cut, you've got low shelf, you've got peak, high shelf, high cut. I find that I'll be working with peaks, especially in this EQ window, more than not. So what I'll do is I'll leave the first two completely alone. You might find in some advice from the voiceover world to boost some of the low end. That's just because it gives you a nice, full, luscious, almost like powerful tone when you have those lows in your voice. You know when you're in the movie theater and you hear a narration and the guy's just like, in a world, and he's got this incredible low voice. They're probably boosting some of the low end. They're also probably using an incredible microphone and taking advantage of proximity effect. That's just the distance between you and the capsule, in other words. So for pop music, for modern music in general, you really just don't need to mess around with this. This is where I start to play around with EQ, starting at 1 kilohertz. That does seem to be a soft, good tone in my voice. So what I'll do is I will keep it on peak. I will set it to 1K, and then I will adjust the gain. So EQing on the front end is a very bold move. If you're putting EQ adjustments, boosts, not cuts, boost, you are very confident that this is what you're looking for. If you are not confident in the adjustments you're making, I recommend you actually just do not EQ at all. Wait until you know what you want. And a good way to find out what you want is to record flat like this, and then after you've recorded flat, do some post-editing. EQ your voice, find the things you do like, the things you don't like, and then see if you can incorporate that into the front end of your workflow so you don't have to work on it on the back end. So again, I'm going to just boost because I know for my sake, I like to add a little bit of 1K. I'm going to do minor adjustments, nothing over 5 decibels because it's permanent, right? And then my Q is actually there to determine the width of my peak, right? So just for the sake of exaggerating and giving you a visual, I'm going to push this up. And now the Q can be adjusted to be thin or wide. So why would you want thin versus wide, right? In mixing, and I guess recording, right? You're going to want to have it set to wide if you want a nice, smooth EQ, right? You want it to feel comfortable on the ears. If you're going for a tight EQ, you're going to notice that it's surgical. It's very pointed. I mean, we can see that visually. But in a lot of cases, I don't really need surgical EQ for recording unless I'm trying to pull something out that I don't like. I don't recommend, if you're a singer and you're doing modern music, that you play around with that too much. I generally will just leave it around 10. I think that's what it comes on default. And then I'll make my adjustments very, very slight. So 1 to 5 dB. In this case, 1.5. The last point we have here is going to be set to 4K by default, it looks like. I like to play with this for my air. So Focusrite actually has a option that they call air on the front of their units. It's locked in, I believe, somewhere around 10K hertz, but I don't quote me on that. The point is you're locked in. There's no flexibility there. It does provide a little bit of high-end boost that gives you a little bit of clarity, but it's cool that we have the option here to use any frequency we want. You could go to 12K, you can go to 10K, you can go to 8K, you can go wherever you desire, up to 20, which is the limit to our human hearing, right? So if you get this at 10K and then you turn it up just a little bit, just a hair, I'll push it like 1 dB, again, maybe 1.5, 2 dB. This is going to give you that presence, that clarity in your voice. It's best if you just hear it, honestly. So I do recommend you guys come in here and play around a little bit. Maybe boost it past what you're going to actually use it for, so that you can exaggerate the results and get a good feel for how it'll be. So right here, this is a really good subtle setup in my opinion for my voice. I've got 1K boosted 1.5 decibels, and I've got 10K boosted 1 decibel. It's really not going to do a lot, but it's going to just sweeten up and clear up my voice enough that I know in my experience, I should say, in my history, these points do help my voice. So let's say I love this and I want to use it later and I don't want to set it up later. I'll hit snap. I'll pick one of these numbers. In this case, I'm going to pick 2, and then I'm going to hit store. It's going to ask me to overwrite because I already had one there. So I'm going to hit yes. And now, just for the sake of example, I'll show you if we hit EQ reset and hit recall, look at that, the EQ's gone. But now if we go to number 2 and hit recall, our EQ is back. So that's a good way to save time in the future. The last section we're going to go over here is the dynamics. If you go to the dynamic section, make sure it's on first of all, you're going to have a gate, a compressor, and a limiter. It appears that we've got this on-off switch for everything, but then you've also got an on-off switch for each, the gate, the compressor, and the limiter. For the sake of singing, I don't recommend playing too much with the limiter or the gate. This is just my experience personally, but I will go over what they do. So the gate is essentially going to clamp down and practically mute your source whenever you're not singing. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to set an attack and release time in order to determine how fast it clamps down and how long it takes for it to let go. I find that I just don't really want that. You know, it's better for me to have it all and edit it later than it is for me to accidentally cut off a take a little too short, or maybe the gate just clamped down in a funny way that I didn't like. So I generally leave the gate alone. That's my own personal preference. Again, this is all for recording vocals. Now, if we go over to the compressor, looks like it's already kind of set up where I would walk you through here, but ratio, I like a nice modest ratio. So 3:1, 4:1, those are good places to start. If you want less, obviously go to 3:1. But the idea is just to curve or pull back on my voice when I'm getting a little too loud and not necessarily crush the signal so that it's something I have to deal with later. So if I go ahead and set the attack and release, which I've already done, 8 milliseconds and 30 milliseconds for the attack and release, those are good starting points. I do recommend you go through based on genre and determine these specs. For example, your attack may want to be faster or slower if you're singing versus rapping, right? Same with the release. You may want it to hold on to that compression longer, or maybe it should be hanging on to it hardly at all. That's going to be dependent on how fast you're singing, or really just the saturation of the compressor that you're looking to get. The input threshold is going to determine when you start compressing. I've got the mic pretty far away from me right now. I'm going to try to angle it at me. There we go. But just as an example, let's say this meter is telling me whereabouts I'm hitting. So I'm hitting a little over 18, it looks like. And then I have my threshold at -18. So as I turn it down, you're going to start to notice on the right-hand side, the gain reduction starts pulling down. So I'm going to just make this really dramatic so you can really see that red line. I'm going to just dramatize the hell out of it. There we go. So you could see that red line. That's your gain reduction there. And again, essentially what's happening is as soon as you pass the threshold that you've set, in this case, I'm at -27, it's going to use your ratio to determine how much is going in and how much is coming out based on that. In this case, 3:1. Your output gain, or your makeup gain, I should say, that is totally up to you. I'm not a fan of auto gain on any compressor. Doesn't matter what device you're using. I just like having the flexibility to do it myself. I don't want it to determine what I'm doing. But if you're into that kind of thing, there is an auto gain button right there. Generally, I'll set it to 0. 0 meaning unity. In other words, it's doing nothing. That is what I like. And then as I realize that ducking sound from the compressor, you know, when it pulls down on your voice and it sounds smooth, but then it sounds like you're a little just unnatural. The way to get back that tone and to make it feel smooth all the way through is to turn the makeup gain up. So maybe we'll turn it up a little bit and, you know, adjust for that. The limiter, again, just like the gate, it's not something I would really deal with as a vocalist. There's really no good reason to have a limiter on unless you are really pushing your levels. If I were to record something like a kick drum, or if I were to record something that I knew is very possible that I'm going to peak on it, that's when I would throw the limiter down. But the definition of a limiter really is just a compressor with a 20-to-1 ratio or greater, which is funny because I think this can go higher than that. It can, look at that. So we're technically limiting on the compressor if we go to 32-to-1. So again, as a vocalist, if you're setting this up for singing, really don't worry so much about the gate. You could go ahead and turn that off. Same with the limiter, turn it off. Work with the compressor, work with subtle settings. You want subtlety, you want natural, you want smooth. 3-to-1 is a nice solid starting point. If you want to push it a little harder, go to 4-to-1. Okay, so let's get out of that. Oh, you know what? I should say that there's also a snap feature for your presets in the dynamics, as well as a dynamic reset. Okay. The last thing I want to show you guys, and I think this is pretty cool, is if you want this, actually, there's two things I could show you. Sorry. I'll try to make it quick. We're going to wrap this video up soon. So the reverb function on each channel, it's kind of hidden, but it's not in this section because you got to hit the home button. When you hit the home button, you got your reverb knob right there, and then you can turn it up on the channel. The reverb is never going to be recorded. You'll be able to hear it, but it's not going to be recorded, all right? Keep that in mind. So we're going to turn that down. Look at that. Just bypass things. So the last thing that I was going to get to there, and then we got distracted by the reverb, which you can adjust here. I'll let you play with that. Is if you want to record the EQ and dynamic processing, but you also want to record a raw track, something completely unaffected. In other words, it's the preamp and nothing else. There is a great way to do this. You can record both simultaneously by going to your settings. And then in settings, what you're going to want to do is go to, I believe it's USB I/O. And then we're going to go to analog in post effects. We're going to trigger that on. So now what it's saying is analog 1 and analog 5 on our inputs to the computer are now simultaneously recordable. So when I set this up in Logic, for example, I will have 2 tracks, and I will have one taking input 1, one of them taking input 5. Record arm both, and simultaneously it'll record the analog in post effects on channel or input 5, and the analog in on input 1 in this particular case. Oops. So I've got some written guides about that on my site, Kris Does Audio. I did want to just do this quick overview of getting started, and hopefully it helps a few people. If it did and you want me to go a little bit more in depth with the settings, perhaps you want me to do a quick demonstration because it's easier to follow along, let me know, throw it down in the comments, and I'll get to it. Also, if there's any kind of content on the MT48 that you think would be helpful to view as a tutorial, feel free to let me know. I'm trying to build up a MT48 database over at my website and also on this YouTube channel. So give me a holler and I'll help you out.